There is a question on the general adaptation syndrome and chronic stress. What happens in that state when stress becomes chronic? There's a question about social comparison theory. A question on the role of proximity in attraction. A question about competence and its role in attraction. The halo effect. There's a question about insanity as a legal term. There's a question on the main categories of mental disorders. Basically, there are personality disorders, anxiety disorders, psychoses, and mood disorders. There's a question about the manual that we use to diagnose mental disorders. Basically, it's a description. It doesn't talk about the theoretical explanations or the causations of mental illness. There's a question on how dangerous it is to mislabel people, or to label people at all. Rosenhan did an experiment on that, so there are a couple of questions on his experiment. There's a question on the medical student's disease. A couple of questions on the history of therapy. We had talked before about practices of primitive people. During the Dark Ages, the people with mental illness were seen as being possessed by demons and spirits. There's a question on cognitive therapy. What did they focus on in cognitive therapy? What did they focus on in behavior therapy? What did they focus on? There's a question on medication, that it's a medical intervention through the use of medication. When someone's given something like an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety, even a sleeping medication. There's a question on some of the symptoms of alcoholism, which you should be able to identify from the movie. There's a question on codependency, which you ought to be able to identify from the movie. Cognitive therapy. There's a question on PTSD. PTSD is classified as an anxiety disorder. There's a question on the stress vulnerability model. A question on positive discrimination, positive prejudice. There's a question about a couple of questions on one question on discrimination and one question on prejudice. Remember that discrimination is an action that you take based on a bias you have, and prejudice is the bias itself. Everyone is prejudiced. You can choose whether or not to act in a discriminatory way. And then there are 12 possible points for bonus points. 8 of them from the movie, another 4 that are just questions about what you learned in class.
From this movie?
Pardon?
This movie?
Uh-huh. And you should ace them all, they're very easy.
Yeah, how many points?
Pardon?
How many points?
From the movie, about 8 bonus points,
Uh-huh.
and then some questions, just general questions about some things you've learned in class. So altogether 12 bonus points, and if you've been awake, you should get all 12.
What chapters are these from?
Chapters 11 through 14. Okay.
Okay,
Where are we? 3 minutes early?
Send it to you.
And then we'll finish the movie. We have about 10 minutes.
okay.